security. There's questions about whether we're creating a 21st century Stasi or whether it's a necessary national security apparatus. There's a question, Bradley Manning, is he a hero or is he a villain? There's a suggestion this is minor adjustments to regularize operational practices. Others say it's a major extension of legal powers. There's a question about whether it's about national security or it's really about commercial interests. There's a discourse on whether Edward Snowden is a whistleblower or a traitor. And actually, the biggest observation I would make is that the discourse is mostly about heat and not much about light. So I'm hoping we can do something about that today with a distinguished panel. We have a 4-person panel. The 4th person is on his way from the airport at the moment. The people who are here are Ian, from my side, Ian Apperley, who's Cloud and Infrastructure Program Manager for Z Energy. He's got a keen interest in planning and moving traditional ICT services to cloud-based technology, both on and offshore, and he's also a freelance writer for magazines, newspapers, and online blogs. The next person is going from that side to that side. I can't work out which is left and which is right. Sir Bruce Ferguson, who joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1969. He's had a distinguished and varied career, including, I loved it from this bit from the resume, re-establishing the Red Checkers, which was the formation acrobatic flying team, and leading them for 2 years. Throughout his career in both New Zealand and overseas, eventually was appointed to the position of Chief of Defence Force in 2002, including spells in Afghanistan and Iraq. He was director of the GCSB. He was appointed as director of GCSB in 2006, and he retired in 2010. And we're really fortunate to have him and his insight into this topic. The person at the far end is Michael Wigley. Michael is a solicitor who's an IT and telecommunications expert with a particular focus on policy and regulatory advice. He specializes in international New Zealand IT, telecommunications, regulation, competition, public law, policy, and often his work extends beyond pure legal issues to complex strategic policy and advice. And the 4th panelist is just sat down, Dr. Paul Buchanan, who's director and principal of 36th Parallel, which is a New Zealand-based consultancy specializing in international politics with an emphasis on unconventional warfare, intelligence analysis, foreign policy, geopolitics, labor politics, and comparative regime dynamics. He's worked for the US Department of Defense and has extensive consulting, research, fellowship, and publishing credentials. He's a regular TV and radio commentator on international affairs. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each panelist to do some initial introductory remarks. I'm going to take that and use that to try and create some discussion among the panelists. And then we're going to open it up to wider discussion, either from people in the audience using the roving mics. If you do that, can you please identify yourself before you speak? Also, Susan has very kindly agreed to monitor Twitter and see if there's any questions coming through there that we can use as part of the discussion as well. So I think I'll start. Ian, can I start with you, just in terms of your preparatory opening remarks? Over to you.
Can everyone hear me? Bring it right forward. Right. I'm feeling a wee bit outgunned up here, to be honest. Just by way of introduction, a lot of what I'm going to say today is my personal views. They have come about as a basis from research into writing and the cloud computing revolution, if you like, and the security aspects of that, and sort of spilled over into this area. So there's a few things that I just want to get out on the table from my point of view. I think that targeted spying is a necessary evil in the world today. I don't think that wholesale surveillance of a population is acceptable, would be my first statement. I think that it goes beyond spy agencies in terms of the risks of the internet and the way that we connect and communicate today. It's not just agencies who are collecting information on us, it's large companies, it's hackers, it's people who want to take your identity and your money. So there's quite a high threat in terms of just communicating in today's online world. Given that, I believe that privacy is the responsibility of the individual, and that to say, to defer that responsibility to somebody else, either your ISP or some other entity, is not a good thing. And there are a number of tools that are freely available today that allow you to protect your privacy online, no matter what you are doing. Given that those tools are available, when it comes to this particular legislation and people capturing data about your online communications and your life, you can choose to opt out. Nothing is infallible, but there are certainly aspects of your life that I think, you need to encrypt, that you need to make private, particularly around your personal details. And I guess the last point, the last couple of points are, Internet New Zealand has raised an issue in one of the select committees that the legislation threatens the ICT industry in New Zealand. I think they're on the mark in some respects. I think that the law and all of the media attention we've seen in the last month threatens an opportunity for New Zealand ICT industry. And that is that over the last sort of decade or so, there's been a number of people working on the idea of, I guess, the land of the long white cloud, New Zealand being the Switzerland of the South and a safe place to save your data, deep archive. All of the attention that's going on threatens that particular opportunity if you believe that we're part of the Five Eyes network, and so PRISM and so on and so forth. Given all of that, when it comes to the law itself, it's my opinion that it's kind of old before it's even born. If I can encrypt my data and I can protect my privacy, and the agency is unable to untangle that, then what's the point?
Thanks, Ian. Paul, would you like to start with some opening remarks? You need to move that towards you.
My apologies for coming in late. Flight from Auckland was a little bit delayed. I guess I should start off by saying that from my experience, which is more human intelligence background than signals, you've got to keep intelligence agencies on a very tight leash. And so the bills in their present form are simply unacceptable. They're too broad. The issuance of warrants is to, again, broadly construe. The agencies for which these warrants could be issued are, to my mind, way too broad. Some of them have nothing to do with national security. And then, as I've said publicly in the past, the oversight mechanisms simply are inadequate. We do not have any independent oversight of our intelligence agencies. And nothing that the Prime Minister is proposing by way of adding a few personnel and resources and whatnot is going to alleviate that fact. My personal opinion is that the oversight agencies have to be made a department of Parliament, separated out from both the committee and the agencies they're supposedly overseeing. And until that happens, we're always going to have issues with regards to oversight. Now, having said that, let me point out something that I think has been lost a little bit, given the rhetoric surrounding these particular pieces of legislation. Terrorism is a fig leaf placed on the intelligence business to justify what they do. Terrorism is not the bulk of what intelligence agencies do. The bulk of what they do, to include the GCSB, is traditional state-to-state espionage, increasingly cyber in manifestation. But 90% of what intelligence agencies do in this country and elsewhere is spy on other states, perhaps spy on commercial entities connected to a state. But terrorism is the buzzword that Western intelligence agencies use to justify all sorts of sins. And we need to strip that fig leaf away and ask them specifically why they do the things they do outside of preventing, apparently, a Boston bombing type attacks. Although I got to thinking when I heard a certain political leader say that if people didn't pass this legislation, we could have such a scenario. The United States, with all of its resources, all of its intelligence agencies, PRISM and the like, did not prevent the Boston bombings. It didn't prevent the Fort Hood massacre, even though the guy who did it was in email contact with a cleric in Yemen who was calling the shots. So we need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that they're fighting terrorism by expanding this type of legislation. They're more interested in other things and much bigger things, to be quite honest with you, because here's the final point. Terrorism is not an existential threat to any established state or any democracy. It's evil, it's nasty, but it will not shake the foundations of any established state. Hence, it can be treated as a criminal matter. It can be treated as a police matter, not as a warfare issue, even though the Americans have turned it into a warfare issue. Final points. First of all, I've heard that this legislation, in part, will prevent duplication of functions between the SIS, the police, who all have their intelligence shops. We have this proliferation of intelligence shops in this country, including in the Prime Minister's office. And so the idea is if we get the GCSB to help out with the technical aspects, then we're not doubling up. Well, excuse me. This is not catering. Okay, we're not outsourcing, catering, the cooking facilities the way private firms might do. This is about intelligence, the most intrusive state activity. So you don't outsource things. If you need to duplicate, you need to duplicate for a reason. The police do certain things. The GCSB listens on to foreign signals. The overlap between them actually should be avoided, not encouraged. And the final point. Believe it or not, all of this is essentially a labor-saving device for the intelligence agencies in question. Because if you allow them more purview when it comes to where they spy and what have you, and if they can do it in automated fashion, it simply saves them a lot of time. If you think the way PRISM works, and I'm sure many of you have now reflected on that, it basically saves a lot of time in determining rhythms and patterns of suspected activity or where to locate targeted surveillance. But at the end of the day, human analysts have to get involved. And so if you can save a lot up front before the analysts get involved and start digging for nuggets of information, that's useful for the intelligence agencies, and I think that's a lot of what is going on here. It's simply about labor savings, to be more efficient in the production of intelligence flows, not only for our own uses, but most importantly for our more senior partners abroad. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul. So Bruce, would you like to go next?
Yeah, why not?
Can we wait till we've had the opening remarks from everybody? There'll be plenty of time for questions.
Questions already. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for that. While you're talking, I just wondered whether what would happen whether one of these criminal organisations actually got hold of weapons of mass destruction. I don't mean small ones, I mean big ones. However, who am I? You know who I am, and my past employment. I will be somewhat circumspect if I'm asked specific questions about specific things. I won't be able to go there. My position, ideologically, definitely to the left of Genghis Khan and somewhere to the right of Keith Locke. I'm not a committed secret squirrel as a thing, and I very, very strongly feel for our democracy, our right to lead free lives. I wouldn't have served 38 years in the military had I not believed in that. But having said that, there is a balance between personal freedoms and a need for securing our nation that somehow needs to be accommodated. That means sometimes, or inevitably, we're going to have compromise, and it is on both sides, both on the lawmakers and on ourselves, maybe give up a few possible freedoms. I do believe in the need for the intelligence organisations and believe that New Zealand generally has the right balance. But we do need to be assured that they will always work within the laws of our country. The current bill, well, it needs to be really well researched. I've very much welcomed and followed through the discussion, the debate on it. I think that was timely, and I think a lot of very good points have been made there. We do need to safeguard our individual rights while protecting our nation. It's a very important point from my point of view. I believe there's a lot of misinformation around our New Zealand intelligence organisations, and really that comes back to their secretive nature. I'm here because I'm no longer one of them. I'm no longer a sworn secret person. I've been out 2.5 years, and I can say what I like within reason. Yesterday, I think I saw in the Dom Post, Tom Scott portrayed the GCSB as a raving German Shepherd dog held loosely on a leash, prepared to attack somebody. Well, actually, I think the GCSB, from my experience of 4 and a bit years there, it's more of a Cocker Spaniel. Has big ears, will lick you to death, but if it really got threatened, it probably would bare its teeth. But that's about all. I do believe that the GCSB is a competent organisation. It's not the rogue organisation that some media have portrayed. My experience, my personal experience, is it is our most professional, dedicated organisation, populated by dedicated professionals, acting under a culture of compliance. Now, Rebecca Kitteridge found that compliance rather difficult, or some individuals in there difficult to find, but nonetheless she said an overarching culture of compliance. That's very important, and that's my experience too. And my view is they're all trying to do their duty within the law. Really, I have confidence in intelligence organisations, but I do firmly believe we need to be very careful how this bill is enacted and how it finally becomes an act. We've got to be, and you're doing it very well here, and Paul Buchanan spoke well on that too, we've got to be very careful to preserve our freedoms while not abrogating the necessary safety of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Michael.
I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of the New Zealand Law Society to pass on an apology to the Prime Minister for some of the things that the Law Society have been saying. I'm going to quote shortly from a passage in the Law Society statement, helpfully quoted in the Imperator Fish blog, which for lawyers is equivalent to the civilian blog. A bit about the Law Society submission. It strongly criticises the bill, raises a number of breaches, the uncertainty, the overreach, and so on. Says in a number of respects that there's a breach of the New Zealand Bill of Rights. It's been written mainly by Dr. Rodney Harrison QC, highly respected QC from Auckland. But as the Prime Minister points out, the Law Society got it wrong. He's dissed it and said it's completely wrong. So here's the apology on the Imperator Fish blog site. Well, Mr. Key, you know best. We're just a bunch of lawyers with concerns for civil liberties, due process and the rule of law. The people who wrote our submission may have spent years studying how our legal system works, but you're the boss, right? Now, the thing about the GCSB governance structure is that the boss is right at the centre of everything. This is a very thin governance structure. He appoints, or she appoints, the director of the GCSB. I say he or she because we're not necessarily talking about the incumbent, we're talking about what might happen down the track. He or she is the person that dishes out warrants, or some of the warrants. That's kind of what judges normally do. That's a judicial kind of job. You expect the boss to act judicially. He or she appoints the monitors, the Inspector General, the people who watch over what the GCSB is doing. And it's pretty obvious that you've got a very tight, and if it's unrestrained and unmonitored, control over what's happening. And my theme is that for all the nice words in the world and getting the legislation right and tightened and avoiding overreach and uncertainty, there will always be a temptation for SIS, GCSB to push the boundaries, to push the lines, as has happened. And while I hear what Sir Bruce said, and I may say that I think it's fantastic that Sir Bruce is coming out and talking as a person formally in the role, because that's quite a courageous thing to do, and I agree with most of what he says. But the difficulty I have, I think, is that over the last 2 or 3 years, there seems to have been clear evidence of overreach, not only by GCSB, but the sister organisations throughout the world. And the story that's coming out in terms of the media spin, in terms of the interpretation of the legislation, all seems to have a commonality. For the life of me, I cannot understand how the people engaged in the last 2 or 3 years in advising and looking at the GCSB on some of these decisions could possibly come to the interpretations of the uncertainty they talk about under the GCSB Act, when any second-year law student would see it as being crystal clear. I guess they are well-intentioned and they're looking to do the right thing, but is that the same? Do they have the same views as we have? Hence the need for monitors. You know, we can't expect James Bond to be Mother Teresa. We can't expect Q to do the zeros and ones the same as Mother Teresa. We can't expect, when we talk about M, well, she's going to do what she believes to be the right thing. I say she because Judi Dench, of course, is the finest M there's ever been. And also a slight nod to Internet NZ. It's an in-joke, this. I'm also keen to point out diversity within Internet NZ. So now, Judi Dench, M, is a fine person, a fine public servant, of course will do the right thing. But her view on what is the right thing, based on the evidence we've been seeing coming out over the last few weeks, seems to be quite different to what we might think. So there's a big role for monitors. And at the moment, the bill does make major changes, and they're good changes, but they don't go far enough, and they do have some weaknesses. So first, about the Inspector General. The regime at the moment says the pool has got the pool of potential Inspector Generals you have to be a retired High Court judge. Now it's said that that's going to be expanded out so the pool can be wider. Now there's a real danger here because, as I said before, the boss is the one that chooses the monitors who watch the boss and watch the GCSB. Somehow we have to control that. There are different ways of doing it, but one of the ways of doing it is ensuring that the Inspector General is from a pre-selected pool of typically fairly neutral and firm kind of characters, yet realistic judges or High Court judges or retired judges. And the current appointees, Andrew McGeechan is a toughie for the Commission of Security Warrants, Sir Bruce Robertson, former Court of Appeal judge, another toughie. Might be some questions as to what's happened over the last few years, but that is a good way forward. It's the same if we have an independent panel. How do we choose how does the Prime Minister choose a group of appointees where he or she have got all the incentives in the world to choose puppets, to choose softies? After all, that is what government typically does, even with acting quite nobly. What happens if they're trying to push the boundaries? And finally, in relation to in terms of monitoring, the Parliamentary Committee also needs to have teeth. At the moment, it's pretty weak. So I think at the end of the day, while getting the words right and getting the limits right are valuable things to do, not a lot is going to happen unless the monitoring regime is strong to actually make sure we get the outcomes that New Zealand wants. And I agree 100% with Sir Bruce in relation to his description of what's important for us. There is a balancing that needs to happen.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Did you have? Bruce.
Just a couple of points to follow on that. I agree entirely on that selection process for the monitoring. You may or may not have noticed a few weeks ago I took issue with the Prime Minister's appointment of the new Director of GCSB. Really, and back of my mind, or foremost in my mind on that, was actually it needed to be totally independent. It needed to be that, and I did not perceive that to be the case. That's why I went public. And you got slam dunked a wee bit, but hey, when you're retired and you don't worry about the income, it's not a problem. The other thing, can I just use this moment just to clarify one thing about the perceptions that the GCSB has gone off the rails, and over the last year or two, the Rebecca Kitteridge